Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to see you today. My name is Dustin Cormier, and I'm very glad to be having an interview today with my friend Gregory Scott. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, Gregory.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time, my friend. Gregory is I believe that your main shtick is the tarot, or at least maybe I should say that was your originating thing that you got into
Yes.
with regards to all this stuff. But I also see that you are also one of the reasons I brought you here is because you're, of course, interested in astrology and as well as numerology and the world of intuition. I think that all these things really share a place in the kind of conversation we're having today. Now, Gregory, you've got a wonderful website, and I believe it's called gregoryscott.com.
Yeah, thank you.
This is where anybody can go to see what you've got going on in your personal astrology world, where they can find the few things that you do. I find that it's very cool that you do readings for days. You'll do like for a reading for March 9th, a reading for March 10th, a reading for every day that I find is wonderful.
Every day.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to reach Gregory and see his stuff, you can see it all on there. Now, Gregory, I'm very thankful for you to be hanging out with me today. My intention for today, for all watching and for my audience watching, this is part of my Astro-Interviews series, where my idea is that I'm talking to different people on YouTube who are using their intuition to heal people and to help people get in touch with their own intuition and really to make a career out of it. It's really the intention that I have with when I bring people on here, is to talk about how they can get a grip and get a handle on these intuitive processes and turn it into something that they can do as a profession. Now, I know that you've been in this game for quite some time. So that is why I'm very happy to have you here, Greg. Now, before we start, I mentioned usually what I like to do is give people a glimpse of the energy of the person I'm talking to. If you're into that, Gregory, maybe I'll show everybody a quick little glimpse of your chart.
Please.
All right. Thank you, my friend. So this is just a quick little glimpse of Gregory's chart here. You're born September 8th, 1991 at 9:18.
81.
Did I say 91 again?
No.
Gosh, it's funny because I'm born 19.
I like that you're making me younger. I like that.
There you go. If anybody asks, Thank you, Gregory, for mentioning that. So you're born 1981.
Yep.
And one of the things I actually wanted to mention is that 1981 is the year of the metal rooster. Metal rooster is already an animal that's in the metal triangle in Chinese astrology. It tends to show somebody who is an industrial sort of person, somebody who's willing to be real about what you're feeling in any moment. The metal signs can come off as what we call sharp, but this sharpness is important in order for the world to abide by intelligent people. And the metal signs will use their ability to be honest and true in order to say what they think needs to be said in a moment. Metal rooster tends to be good for that. Now, I find it interesting that along with this resonance, we see a very strong sixth house resonance inside of your chart. Usually when I do this, I kind of give people the guts of the person's chart. Essentially, you are a Taurus rising. And it's interesting to me that this Taurus rising, you have Venus in its own sign, in the sign of Libra. And Venus is here with this huge stellium happening in this sign. It is being helped a lot by Jupiter. Having Jupiter and Venus together in any sign is a real signification that this sign of Libra in the sixth house is going to be a place of benefic and expansive and really even abundant energy. I find it interesting that you've got Saturn here, exalted in Libra. And for my Vedic audience watching, we see here Taurus rising, and Venus is the Atmakaraka. This shows that the ruling planet of the chart is Venus, according to Vedic astrology. And this would show a strong resonance of that first house of Taurus and the sixth house of Libra, which Venus rules. So there's a real emphasis of more of this sort of consciousness of learning what the self needs in order to operate most effectively in the world. This is something that's probably important for you in your personal life, Gregory. And I think it's amazing that you've probably learned in your life to carve a vocalness or a capacity to express your needs when you're dealing with groups or when you're dealing with other people, when you're dealing with your personal family. You've probably learned how to express the needs that you have in every moment. And I would say, from what I've seen, you probably teach others to vocalize or to move towards the things in life that are important to them. This is something that any Taurus really is going to deal with. But the fact that you have Venus ruling your chart kind of bring this out a little bit more.
Yeah. No, that's true. I totally agree. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome, Gregory. I was hoping that you would see where I was getting there.
Yeah.
And for everybody also interested, we also see the big three are involved in a wonderful trine here. We have Taurus rising as the earth sign rising. We have the sun in the sign of Venus, in the sign of Virgo. It's in the fifth from Taurus, although it is still in the sixth. It's within the sixth cusp. And then we have the moon in Capricorn, which is the ninth sign from Taurus. So there's a real wonderful earth triangle with the big three energies happening here. And I would say that that probably gives you a little bit of a groundedness and perhaps a methodology, a sense that when people come to you for your readings, which astrology can be a mystical thing, somebody with so many earth placements, I imagine that you must have a need to feel like what you're translating to people feels grounded in their personal experience.
Yeah, I don't like to talk around things. I like to know what's happening on Monday. And I just want to clarify something.
Please.
Because you're a Vedic astrologer, right? So you just drew up my chart with your system, the Vedic.
Yes, sir.
I'm tropical. I use Western astrology, and I use the wheel.
Wonderful.
So that's how I read my charts. So we're looking at the same information, it's just a different layout, right?
Certainly. I would say that's absolutely correct. And from my audience knows what I'm all about. I'm a Vedic interpreter. I use Vedic interpretation, but I use tropical measurements.
Right.
So what I'll probably do, Gregory, and it'll just be in this space here, is I'm going to get your Western wheel chart and I'm going to insert it in this video so people can see what you would typically see in your chart.
Okay.
Yes. So, wonderful, Gregory. Now, is there anything else that you wanted to add there before we start to move on in our conversation?
No.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Gregory, for giving us a little glimpse of what you're all about. Now, I've prepared a little bit of a questionnaire, and generally, I go through this questionnaire with every person. Mm-hmm. For you, I'd like to just ask you a few questions that I've been prompted to ask just from me talking with you today.
Yeah.
Just to start us off, I did want to ask you, now there's a few words that we kind of played around with here. The one we landed on is what I would say is intuition. Mm-hmm. Listening to something that is a transmission from inside the consciousness, which doesn't necessarily need fact-based evidence or an observation outside. The intuition is kind of something that comes from within. Now, I wanted to ask you, if you had any sort of way that you would say this, what is it that moved you to feel like intuition was something that was important to you?
So the intuition, the way I call that is your gut instinct, your animal instinct. So your basic, if it sits right with you or if it doesn't. And I've always had an intuition, everyone does. But I've always felt like when I was younger, I was kind of in survival mode. So I had to kind of really look at situations, kind of be very vigilant to suss it out. And I think with that, I always listened to my gut. If something felt dangerous or problematic or off, then I would always listen to that and honor it. And it always served me very well.
And so it's almost like there are things in reality that you're seeing that are leading up to what we would call this intuition.
Yeah, and they trigger it. So if I'm looking at a tree, I'll get some sort of message or feeling about it. And then it adds to the whole experience of what I'm, you know.
Yeah, I would say many astrologers abide by the idea of omens almost. It's almost sort of, if I'm reading you correctly, you know, you'll see anything that you see in any moment is the transliteration of the universe speaking to you from your perspective in that moment. So it makes total sense to me that you would be observing things in the reality of where you are. And this would be a part of the intuition and the instinctive pattern anticipating that you kind of do.
Yeah, it's just your human response to whatever's going on around you. And if I'm reading an astrology chart or the cards, the same thing happens. I just get a feeling, and that often gives me a lot of useful info, which I then include in my personal readings.
Wow. You know, I think that's amazing because I often talk about the fact that many astrologers have a problem of being in their head and they don't have a connection to the heart of what is happening in the moment in a reading. So it gets
really boring if you're just focusing on the facts and stuff. You know, if you're just, because astrology is very interesting, but if you're going on about like this is in the 8th house and it's in its exalted sign, most people listening on the other side of that, they're like, what are you talking about? I want to know how this applies to me, what it says about me as a person, and how I can work with it to get something out of it. They're not really interested in the technical stuff so often. So I think if you're just looking at the, you know, the framework and the scaffolding stuff, then you're losing that personal connection. So I think the hard stuff is just as important as the astrology.
It's really half and half, and that's how most people think of it in the camps that I've moved with. Right. Is that you got to combine that head and the heart, because it's very possible that, you know, somebody could come to an intuitive person and get a reading on an intuition, and the heart is such an important place because it'll mostly be correct if it truly does connect. But an astrologer can lend his knowledge to what he feels with his intuition.
Right.
So it is a very useful head and heart combining mechanism there. But I do appreciate how much emphasis you put on this very earthy sense of what is actually happening in the room, in the moment, in the energy. Now, I would like to ask, do you find that you must do a lot of readings online? That I would when you do a reading for people, is it mostly online or do you meet with them in the room?
No, it's all online. It's all remote. Work from home. Okay.
Do you find that it's easy to read, you know, to read the energy of a person when you are meeting them online?
Yeah, it's easier because if you meet people in person, I used to do in-person readings in Glastonbury, and the first 10 minutes people are nervous and they have to get a cup of coffee and settle down. You're speaking them online, you can get straight into it.
Yeah, I totally get that. And they're in their own space.
Exactly.
So they're in a comfortable space at home, and that's probably okay. Very good. That's useful to you.
I prefer it. Yeah.
That's wonderful, Gregory, and that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I was really lucky to do it like that because of, you know, the lockdown for the last 2 years. I would have had a big problem if I was just doing in-person readings. So it worked out beautifully for me.
No kidding. For the last 3 years or so, that must have been very useful to you.
Yeah, totally.
Now, were you doing online readings before COVID and this whole thing happened?
Online, yeah.
I wonder how long you've been doing it for online in the way that you know, when did you feel like you needed to do this?
I stopped doing in-person readings, I think, in 2015, and I've been doing them online since. And I've had the channel, I think, since 2014, the YouTube channel.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Right on.
Yeah.
So you've been on YouTube for a lot of this time now.
Yeah.
What I often ask people, again, we're talking to my audience about how to kind of get out there, how to get out into the world and start making a presence as an intuitive psychic healer of whatever sort it is that we're dealing with the person. So you, as I was talking to you earlier, you mentioned that you got to kind of play to YouTube a little bit. You got to kind of cater to what's going on in this wacky social media world, almost as a bait, almost as something to
No, I don't think it's bait. I think it's finding ways of getting in front of people.
Yeah, it's
and then I think the key thing with YouTube is to show your personality a bit. Because I'm just going from myself. I watch people who I like. I like people who are interesting and who are personable and who talk about their stuff. I get very lost when someone is talking a lot about technical stuff and it just doesn't interest me. I learn the technical things in order to be able to do what I'm doing. Like, the system of the tarot and the astrology, you study it and you know it and you learn it and then you apply it, right?
Right.
But I like the application combined with personality. And I think if anyone wants to build an audience on YouTube, I mean, not that I'm an expert, but I think it's going to be much easier for anybody if they show a little bit of themselves and you let people get to know you, because then there's a kind of relationship that happens and people are interested in what you're doing as well as the work that you're doing. And I think that kind of creates a sense of community, I think. What you mentioned is, with YouTube, you have to be a little bit, you have to kind of, it's on keywords, right? So no one looks for Gregory Scott, they look for astrology and tarot and all of these things.
Certainly.
So an easy way of inserting yourself into something that's popular, where lots of people are watching it already, is to look at what's being searched. Like if loads of people during an eclipse are looking for an eclipse, then it makes sense to make an eclipse video because you're going to expose yourself to a much bigger audience. If someone types in summer eclipse and then you show up, great. And then you show your personality and then they get to know you and then they'll subscribe. There are also right. So there are other things which are always popular. I mentioned this to you earlier. So for instance, like a lot of people read tabloids, right? So if you go on the Post or the Sun or Page 6 or something, and the top story, and you like, let's say the top story, what did you say, Kanye?
Kanye West, that's what I mentioned.
Kanye West. And when you go, like Kanye did something today, and you happen to be able to read the tarot or do pendulums or read the astrology, then if you make a video on what's happening for Kanye, then certain Kanye fans are going to watch that, and then you expose yourself to them, and if they like you, then they may subscribe. I mentioned to you that I did something at the beginning. I started doing this in 2014, and at the time, I think it's still really popular, but it's ASMR.
Yeah. Yep.
It's like these whisper videos where people like try and trigger you to get like goosebumps.
Yeah.
And I was visiting family, and I couldn't meditate, which is what I usually do. So instead of meditating, I watched these videos to relax. And then when I came back, I thought, let me make a video just as a thank you to this ASMR kind of community. But what happened, it was like a lucky accident. I didn't realize how popular it was. And I think like I had a video where I was fitting a suit or something. I was pretending to be like a suit salesman or something.
Yeah.
And I got loads of views on that. And that got a few people over to my channel. And it got a couple of people to subscribe. And I'm not an expert on algorithms or YouTube searchability or capability or whatever. But if you have 0 subscribers and 0 views on your videos, it's very difficult to suddenly get them. But if you suddenly have a couple of people discovering you and watching your stuff and maybe even subscribing, like a few hundred or something, it does something to your videos. They appear in searches. They actually show up. Or back in the day for me, they did. And it was once I had a couple of hundred people, that's when the channel started to grow slowly. So it's about going outside of your area of expertise and just kind of presenting yourself and letting the chips fall where they may. And if people like you, they'll watch you. If not, they won't.
Wow. That's so useful and honest, Greg. You know, I think that there's 2 things that I'm really picking up from this that I really love and appreciate. One of them is that, you know, I completely understand what you're talking about, is launching the seed of yourself into these different areas. But really, when you get there, what you're really doing is just presenting yourself, and you're being honest about what you feel about whatever that thing is. I think there's nothing wrong with throwing yourself into something that's going on in the world that's a big deal that everybody's talking about. I think it's a way to catch hype for sure. But ultimately, you're just going to be, if you go, you be your honest self, you present what you would be presenting in your videos on your home channel. And so that's my idea there, is that's a very, I think people are afraid to do that because it's going to look like, you know, I mentioned the word bait and you corrected me in a good way, because there are probably lots of people who, we talk about video bait, where you'll put on like, I'm talking about Kanye in this video, and then you go there and you're not really even talking about Kanye. You just wanted to use it to catch the fire.
Oh, clickbait. Okay, yes.
Clickbait. That's the word I'm thinking.
But the thing as well is, like, I suggested doing these things, right? But for instance, I said, like, if you had an interest in tabloids, and
That's
like, I had a genuine interest in ASMR, that's why I did it. So I would never make a video on chopping wood in order to get people to my YouTube channel, because I personally have no interest in it. And then, you know, other people are intuitive. Everyone's intuitive. If you're not into it and you're just doing it to kind of get people to come to you, people sense that.
People will smell it.
He's just like hyping himself up here. They will smell it. So any of your interests that you've got, I think it doesn't matter what it is, as long as you have a personal like passion for it, and it happens to be popular at the time. That's the combo that works.
Wonderful, wonderful. And really,
you know, like when a comedian talks about his mother-in-law and he doesn't even have a mother-in-law, people know that. People sense it.
And it feels like, really, it's, you might think it's going to catch fire because of the hype or whatever, but ultimately people can see what's behind that flash in the pan, right?
Yeah, if you're just doing lip service, people sense that. And they
wonderful. Very, very clear, Gregory. I really appreciate that. So we can see that you really got into what you're doing through, at least you got into this through your genuine interest in. So were you doing the tarot before you did that ASMR thing? Yeah,
I was doing tarot videos. I've been doing tarot. I went to see my grandmother at age 11. She had a deck of tarot cards.
Okay.
And I really liked them, and I kept using them. And there are a lot of symbols in the tarot that have to do with astrology. So I started to learn astrology, but the tarot came first. I was doing the tarot videos on YouTube. And yeah, I think it was at the same time I did the ASMR. It was at the very beginning. I did both. And that's how it grew. Yeah.
Wonderful. Very interesting, Gregory. So one thing I kind of want to ask you, when you deal in the tarot, have you been exploring the symbols of the tarot? You know, a lot of people think that it's very strictly astrological, although again, I'm inclined to think, you know, whatever astrology is written in the tarot cards, an intuitive person is just basically going to pick up on using their intuition. Now, did you learn tarot through any strict measures and means, like through a school or anything like that, that connected the symbols of the tarot to astrology or anything esoteric? Or have you just been moving through it, you know, through a go by feel and that sort of experience? You know, I'm asking because I'm not sure if there are schools that really deal with tarot in the way that I'm kind of talking about. So what's your experience on how you picked up on the symbology of the tarot?
I felt I had an affinity for it, so I read books on the tarot. Then there were lots of astrology symbols in the tarot where I needed extra learning. And I tried to learn astrology myself by reading coffee table books and having my chart done and doing. But I needed to do a proper course with a syllabus, with a tutor. It was a distance learning. I did a certificate and a diploma. And I would recommend anyone who wants to be a professional astrologer, you get the bones of the actual curriculum, the coursework. It seems to be a lot. A lot of people are put off by it because there's so much to learn. But once you've learned it and you've got it. And then it's exactly the same as the tarot. It's a divination system that you can read in the moment. So it's a tool. Once you've learned it, then it becomes applicable. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, because learning astrology, it's a lot, right? It's a lot.
There's a lot there. No, well, human consciousness there's a lot there. So of course, any system that defines it has to be complex, right?
Sure, of course. And astrology is like the king of the divination systems because it's the most complicated. You got solar arcs and midpoints and so I think a lot of people worry, if I put myself out there as an astrologer and if I miss part of the curriculum, I don't know what I'm talking about, and someone says, oh, what do you think about solar arcs? And they're like, what? Then they're like, I would die with embarrassment, right? So a lot of people that puts them off. And that's why I'm saying, like, getting a good education in it is really important because it builds your confidence, and it means you can then put your own take on this divination system that you've learned.
Certainly.
And you don't have to compare yourself and feel worried that you don't know enough, because you know you've got the basic knowledge. And as you go, then you grow and learn and you add your own meanings. So the tarot led me to the astrology symbols. The tarot is much easier to learn than the astrology because it's just so big. The tarot, I don't think you need to go to a school for it. I do a tarot course on YouTube, and I don't have an astrology course because it is so in-depth and involved. I don't think I could do it justice.
Gotcha.
And I tell people, if you want to do astrology, then really go to an established school that's reputable, like doesn't cost an arm and a leg.
Right. Yeah.
That gives you then the
Yeah, because as long as you've really can just show that you've been studying it with a lineage, really, that's where any good healer of any sort, that's the tools that they need, just to be able to say that you did work into some corner of culture that has astrology and has an idea of it. Because ultimately, if you are healing people and you're using your intuition, your schooling will give you the tools that you need, so long as you've gotten to some kind of tool that's reputable, or at least reputable in enough that it has a foundation that you can work within and that people can recognize.
You need to get educated to be able to do the job.
Right, certainly. Just like with any job, really.
Yeah.
So very good, Gregory. Now, I appreciate you just kind of running me through all these different things. Your insights are great. So now I would like to ask you, you are somebody who does sessions for people, and as well, you also do your readings online. Anybody can find your readings online, and they can see that, like I said, you do tarot readings for days and events and these sorts of things. Yeah. Now, something I would love to just start to pick your brain on a little bit is, in your world of your personal client sessions, this is something that I like to go into as much depth as I can in these interviews, not only so that people can see your process, but so that everybody can, talk about the process of reading an astrology reading. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to ask you, Gregory, really, maybe I'll just underline this because you gave me 4 chunks that I think are good, just pictures of how you apply yourself. You've got tarot, you've got numerology, you've got astrology, and you gave me the wonderful word at the end of all this, intuition. And as we've already explained, the way that you abide and use intuition, I see it as being a very incredibly powerful heart of all these more intellectual sort of divination methods. So this intuition word is very important to me because, as I've said, many people, when they do an astrology chart, I'm finding the more astrologers I talk to, they all have different ways of beginning a session. Okay. Some astrologers will swear that the client needs to give the exact birth information. The client should have an idea of a question that they want the astrologer to approach. And then when they finally meet the astrologer, there's a little bit of a conversation of like, who are you? Who are the people in your immediate family? What's your job? Where do you live? Are you happy in all of these fields? Sorry?
Sorry to interrupt. Is that what you do, or is that what's generally?
No, I see a lot of people doing that. I myself don't necessarily feel the need to do that, although I do talk with people. I will say I do the second thing. I talk with people about their life so that I understand who I've seen in the chart.
Oh, okay.
Right. Now, this is kind of what I would like to ask you. When you are approaching a client for the first time, a client has messaged you, and of course, different clients are going to message you different things. Maybe they'll just message you and say, I'd like a reading.
Right.
Well, how do you approach an email and a question like that? Where do you go right from the get-go?
So I need place of birth, date of birth, time of birth. I don't interview people before I speak to them. Okay. I look at the chart some people study it for hours. I look at it for 5 to 10 minutes before I call people, and then I read it in the moment, because that's when my intuition kicks in the moment.
Wonderful.
So if I'm reading it then it's not as... and at the beginning, I don't ask them about their life. I just say, what would you like to get out of today?
Right. Cool.
I don't need questions. If it's just a general reading, then I'll do a general reading. If they have specific questions, like, great, okay, we'll look at that. And then I just start reading the chart, starting with the rising. Then I move to the sun, the moon, the midheaven, the strongest house, and then I go through the rest.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. So you really do you find that if you do too much reading on the chart before connecting your intuition of your heart to the other person's heart, do you think your head can pull you too far into the facts of the astrology chart and make you presume things are happening that might not actually be happening with the person? Is that why it's better for you to work your intuition and read the chart in the moment?
No, you're right. That's true. You could get to, like, you could start telling yourself a story.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't find it very useful, because I see in 5 minutes the general impression that I have. And then when I go through it with a person, it's kind of like we're in the same boat and we're learning it together.
Cool.
So I
Wow.
don't want to be there with preconceived notions of who this person is, because then, yeah, exactly what you said.
Wonderful. I see that just being such a wonderfully earthy. I really see the earth character of your chart coming through in this style.
Right. And
And
also,
I'm
that would be very time consuming. Like, if
it
you
is.
read, like, I spoke to this woman and she's like, "Oh yeah, I meditate on the chart for like days." It's like, well, don't you, like, do you ever speak to anyone then? Because I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you can't, like, how many readings a day can you do if you're meditating? That's not my process.
Very interesting. Okay. And that makes sense to me because I know that there are, I think we should probably say at this point that because part of how I do my readings is I like to dig into it a little bit. I like to read their chart for an hour or two,
Oh,
and to get a little bit of a sense of it before I meet them in the reading.
right.
I will say that I think there's cons and pros again to every approach because I can only do like one reading a week.
Right.
I got people lined up for, well, I mean, I shouldn't say it that way, but I go week by week so that I can kind of digest their chart in a very loose sort of way. I look at the chart and I kind of sit with it, with the bones of it for about 2 hours or more before I
Really?
finally meet them.
Wow,
Uh,
I'm really impressed by that.
well, thank you.
No,
I
like,
appreciate it.
just
I appreciate you saying that, Gregory. And I will say that I'm learning that the more time I spend beforehand, I will get too heady. And so I used to do 5 hours because I don't know, I was nervous and I didn't want to mess anything up. I'd study their chart for 5 hours to finally meet them and talk with them for 2 hours. As time has gone on, I've come closer to the consciousness that you're giving me, which is that the earthy moment of the session is going to give you so much more data than you can
sorry,
instigate.
I'm going to say something that you're probably not going to like,
Oh, it's
but
okay, please.
the thing that I'm thinking when you're saying that, like, it's not about you. You know what I mean?
Yes, certainly.
So
Certainly.
if you're nervous and like doing this for hours, then you probably will get in your own head about it. And until you speak to the person, you don't even know what they want to talk about. Like, some people don't want a general reading; they just want to talk about their love life. And then if you studied the metaphysics of their, like, past
Of
lives,
everything. Yeah.
then it's just like, what did you do all of that for if it wasn't even relevant?
Gregory, I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me where
Oh,
I've read 5 hours about something that they might be interested in. And I actually sit with them and they say, yeah, I'd like to ask about this. And I go, uh-huh. Great. Let me
right,
just throw out all the work I did. So
right.
but of course you're right. As I went through, I had to do a little bit of heavy self-reflection and realize that there's a deep desire in me to be the super cool, amazing astrologer. And that has gone away a lot as I've
Yeah.
settled into my practice a little bit and learned that I'm here to hold space for the person, not for me to be a professional, excellent astrologer and to show
No,
off my
exactly.
skills.
Because your customers don't really, or our customers, they don't really care like who we are. They're interested in their own charts
Mm-hmm.
and what they can learn about themselves to make improvements. So
Mm.
if you like, being, if it's about you, then it just takes away from the reading, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Gregory. And I appreciate you saying that the way that you're putting it down. So you really do put a lot of emphasis on the energy of the moment that the person comes to you and does a reading with you. Now, I will ask you, so this must give you a little bit more capacity to be a really on the punch, on the pulse type of healing person. So, if you don't mind my asking, feel free to answer this however you like. But if you were to give a general idea of how many charts you could do, let's say, or how many sessions you could do, maybe within a week on average, is that an okay question for me to ask you?
Yeah, of course. I do 3 or 4 readings a day.
3 or 4 readings a day. Wow. Wonderful.
Yeah. And then I put on the daily videos and the weekly horoscopes. And the readings are great because you're in the moment, you see. And then no, but sorry, I'm just going on and on.
Yeah,
3 or 4 days. That's the answer.
Well, that's great, Gregory. That makes sense to me. And I love that you apply this sort of, I almost see it being very like Virgoan, you know, it's kind of like it's mutable. It's just meeting the moment, but it's not too heavy on preparation, not obnoxiously heavy on preparation, but it doesn't go too hard on anything. You're just kind of being with the person in the moment of what's happening. And that allows you to have probably many readings.
Yeah, and you have a much better time. And that's why I also said you need to have the basics of astrology down, because if you're sitting there worried about like, oh, what does Venus mean in Libra, then you're not listening and you're not in the moment. So it's got to be like second nature, and then you can have a conversation. Like, for instance, the new moon and the full moon videos that I do on YouTube with the chart next to me, I prepare about 2 minutes for those and I read them on camera and then I publish it. So it feels urgent. It's not because I'm not saying that to say you don't need to do your preparation or it's better if it's current or something. It's just like if the astrology in itself isn't a huge issue, then you can get a lot more done and it feels more current than if you've rehearsed something, because then that sounds and feels fake.
And it really totally it's the scripted thing. And again, it's the same thing is people, they come to learn about themselves, and what they meet is this person trying to display their knowledge,
right?
And not really actually giving them what they're interested in hearing.
Yeah, which is them.
Very, very clarifying, Gregory. Thank you so much for the perspective that you have there. This is totally one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on here. Me myself, I've only been doing this for about like a year and a bit. I feel like I'm learning a lot just by talking to you. So thank you so much for that. Now, I wanted to ask you, Gregory, well, you deserve it, pal. So, since when you start a reading, really what you do is, I guess that you'll kind of get the quickest glance that you can from the birth information that they've given. You'll give it like a 5 to 10 minute sort of an overlook of what you'd see as the main guts. Do you often use the big 3 when you're talking with people about, actually, I'm going to ask it to you this way, Gregory. You've mentioned that you do general readings, but I guess when people come to you, you're not always going to anticipate that they are looking for a big picture of who they are, of who they were in their childhood, of who they are now, of who they want to be in the future. I suppose if they want that sort of reading and they mention it, then of course you're going to give it to them. So when people come to you for a reading, and for a general reading especially, is your instinct to take them through their childhood in any way? Or do you really, again, you're reading by intuition of what they ask when they come to you for a reading? Would you say that's correct?
If someone comes to me for a general reading, I read their chart and I bring up what I see. And if I see something about their childhood, I'll bring it up and I'll say, I see that in your childhood, you've got this in your 4th and 5th house, and I think you would have had some problems there. You know what I mean? So I bring up what I see in the chart, and then we tend to speak about what do we speak about? So if I read the chart, then certain topics will appear and I will talk about them and they'll respond to what I'm saying. And so we do an overview of what comes up via the chart. And usually it's the key themes that they're thinking about anyway. So sometimes you bring something up and they're like, oh, I'm glad you brought that up because I want to speak about relationships. Or whatever.
Right.
It happens like that,
So do you find yourself in a way kind of instigating what the person is there to talk about. Like, I mean, I guess, again, this is a go by feel thing. If you feel a person comes to a reading and they say, yes, I'd like a general reading, but they've got a splintering thing that they actually want to talk about, I suppose that you're just going to take them by their, say it again, Gregory. Do you find?
I've never had that. I've never heard someone said, I just want a general reading, but then deep down say, I really want to hear about relationships. People are much more open and honest with me. If they want to talk about relationships, they tell me.
Yeah, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. When they come to an astrologer, I suppose that's just, they're looking to get their questions asked.
And if it's just general, they're like, I just want to know about my chart, what my strengths and weaknesses are, maybe what's coming up in future, anything that I should be aware of. And then I just give them that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Totally. So that being the case, do you find that a lot of people will come to you for readings about something? And do you do more general readings like that? Or do you find that people come to you and they end up wanting to get at a specific thing? Which of these two do you think is a more common experience for you as an astrologer and tarot reader?
I'd say like 80% people want to know specific topics and specific questions and things going on in their lives. And about 20 or 30% of people who are interested in their chart and just want a general gist of it.
Right on. Right on. And okay, that makes sense. Now, something that I do want to ask you, when you are sitting with a person, do you charge by like the minute, or do you charge by the hour? Do you charge by the session?
I have 15, 30, 45 minutes, an hour readings. It takes me 30 minutes to do a birth chart in detail.
Gotcha.
So if someone wants to understand their chart, I say, please order 30 minutes and we'll do the birth chart. For progress charts and transits and seeing what's coming up in future and specific questions in astrocartography, I need 45 minutes to an hour to look at everything. So people book me for the amount of time so that I can fulfill what they want out of it.
Cool. And you offer these tiers of time and money.
And I describe what they get with each one. So if you just have one question, then I do a 15-minute reading, or like 3 or 5 questions. I can do that in 15 minutes, you know. But if they want to understand their personality and who they are and stuff, I can't just do that in 15 minutes.
Certainly not.
To read the chart.
Wonderful. You know? So the reason I asked is because I thought maybe you just say, hey, everybody, come and see me and we'll work it out when we get there. Person gets there and they say like, you know, like I'd like an astrology reading with the transits and everything. And, you know, you don't just build that out in the moment. They have to tell you the intention, at least at that level. And
they know, they know exactly what they're going to get.
Right.
Because and it's down to them to pick what they want. And that's, I think, why I get very few general readings, I suppose, or fewer. But if you leave it vague and stuff, then people would get upset. You know, they need to know what they're getting, and then they need to feel like that's been fulfilled. Cool. If it's like vague, like, oh, maybe, then they're like, what? Why did I speak to you for an hour?
About this?
To me, that sounds like trouble. You know?
Cool. Absolutely. That's very clarifying, Gregory. Now, did you just intuit this when you first started? Just you had the idea that I want to offer tiers for people so that they don't go into the experience that you're talking about, where it's just this like, I don't know, what do you want? I don't know what I want out of this experience. Did you right from the beginning tier it up this way?
I think I had 30 minutes and 60 minutes because I realized that it takes me 30 minutes to read a chart. So if you want me to do it for you, you're going to have to give me 30 minutes. And then if you want everything, I need 60.
Right.
And then I broke it down into the 45 and 15 as I got more like, okay, with what I know, what takes what. But it's basically, I can only provide what I say I provide in a certain time frame. So I just got, that was always the case. Because I mean, I couldn't, from the get-go, I realized that I couldn't read someone's charts in like 10 minutes. So I never offered 10-minute readings.
Good. Yep. That makes perfect sense to me. And I always like to see when something comes from just in natural human intelligence, which I feel like happened with you in this case. You started applying it from
intelligence.
Well, you seem to be working it out okay, Greg. So I'd say that's a good thing, pal.
But it was kind of organic, yeah.
And I love to see.
I don't want to be rushed and stressed in a reading either. Like I don't want to say, okay, I've got to hammer home like you're like go. like, because then you like drive yourself like up the wall, you know?
I guess there's a sort of like, you got one eye kind of telling the person like, I appreciate that we're talking, you know, if somebody comes for a half an hour reading, once you get to the 40-minute mark, you're like, you know, this has been a good reading. And I think if you want to ask me again about anything else, we're going to start wrapping it up because we're getting to the end of our time that we've agreed upon.
Oh yeah, I don't like, I stick to my timings.
Yeah. Very good. I love that. Anybody.
Because I'm sorry to keep talking over you, but like
no,
10 minutes or 20 minutes extra on every reading, if you're doing 3 or 4 a day, that's another hour a day.
Right.
And then you really are at risk of like burning yourself out, and because it adds up very quickly.
Certainly. And that totally makes sense to me, Gregory. I see that being more evidence of your consciousness that is so grounded in earth. You make a statement of, this is the product, this is the time, and I'm going to stick with it. People come to you, they get the product, they get the time, you do stick with it. And this is one of the reasons why you get to stand on your own 2 feet as an astrologer all this time. You're not getting sucked under by the possibility of this job overtaking all your time, because you're firm and solid in what you've stated as the time that you're going to deliver for the money that you've been given. I feel as a Leo rising with Sagittarius moon, that's good wisdom for me.
But you're going to be more generous in terms of, I'm willing to go over.
You got it. And that sucked out a lot of my life energy at first when I first got into it.
But you know what you got to remember as well, like if you're doing a reading, you're not like at a bank talking about someone's bank statement. You're like talking about really intense emotional stuff. And a lot of the times when I'm doing a reading, like at the end of it, I'm like on the floor, I'm tired. I have to concentrate. I use my intuition. I'm reading the chart. It's not like la-di-da, you know, you have to really pay attention. So you have to really judge like how much you can do. And for me, I found that over time that, and I don't even know if I've got the balance right now, because sometimes I am like, oh my, I can't, it's too much, you know? So for me, I have to be really strict with what I can do. Otherwise, if I burn myself out, then I can't do any readings. And that's worse than doing like, I want to do what I'm doing, but like if I can't do any, then, you know, let alone 4 a day, I'm doing 0 a day.
Yeah.
So
and then
take care of myself a bit too, you know?
Certainly. And, you know, one of the reasons that I often like to make this metaphor that any tree that wants to give of its fruits needs to be firm and strong in its roots.
Right.
In the same way, if you just give up all your fruits all the time and don't work on holding and firming the root structure that's allowing you to give those fruits, you're not going to have those fruits.
Yeah, totally. Wow, nice image. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Cool, Gregory. And the way you've conveyed it just completely makes sense to me. So this is very clarifying. This has been a great session for me, Gregory. Just talking with you, I see the earthy capacities in your chart are really giving me a lot to chew on, and I'm feeling pretty confident that my audience must feel the same. Now, we've got
feedback.
Yes, certainly, my friend, of course. So this has been great, Gregory. I love your approach. I love how open it is to being able to be movable but still firm in what you're doing. Because I definitely know, especially with the world of astrology, the 8th house, I think, burns a lot of astrologers, because what happens is people are hearing all the things you're telling them, and their emotional urgency can get activated, because the nature of astrology and a reading, even a tarot reading, can just be can get right to the guts of the heart of the colon of the person, you know, just deep into all the junk that they've got happening. Right. And that firmness that you apply allows you to do what you're doing without getting sucked under the 8th house of collective, shall we say.
It's really interesting that you're saying that, because I don't really think about it like that, but it is a very fine balance. You know, if you're doing a reading and someone's really like crying, and you're saying, well, we're at minute 31. you can't just hang up and be like, see ya. I mean, it's a balancing act. And I never really think about it like that. And also, like, you know, if you have compassion for someone, or if you're talking about something really intense, and you're talking about it in order to try and resolve it and heal it and stuff, you got to structure it within your reading so that you're not doing it in the last 2 minutes.
Ah, wow, wonderful. That's definitely useful for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I find that you could spend a lot of time getting comfortable with the person until you finally, 25 minutes in, you find what you actually want to talk about. And then you've only got 5 minutes to unfurl the real guts of what you were trying to get there. And I suppose that's just part of the nature of being an astrologer. So after you've been doing it for all this time, I imagine at the start, it must have felt like it's hard to keep these within the 30-minute lines. But I imagine, I want to ask you, Greg, maybe this will be one of the sort of, we're leaning towards the end of our interview here. I want to ask you, is it your experience that you have people coming to you, perhaps, let's say, it can either start at the 15 and move to the 60, or it'll start at the 30 and the 60 and move to the 15? What I mean by this is you must have a lot of people coming to you saying, I'd like a general astrology reading. Mm-hmm. And you get the reading and you give them a deep picture of the chart and of everything that they need in terms of a natal reading. Okay. Then they would come back to you and say, Greg, the last time we talked, I got the guts of it. Now I got this new job happening next week. Let's do a 15 and talk about this little thing.
Yeah, that happens.
Right. And would you say a lot of your clients who are like the 15-minute quick tarot reading, do they come from previous readings?
I don't just do tarot readings or astrology. I always combine everything together. Okay. 15 minutes or 30. A lot of people come 15 minutes because it's the quickest and they just have one or two options or questions.
Yeah.
And usually people have spoken to me before. They come back for like 15 or 30, 45 minutes to look at what's going on now and to revisit. So it really varies. I think I get a lot of... No, so you get first timers who just want like quick info.
Yeah.
And you have repeat people who want a quick update. Yeah.
Yeah, right on. And I figured that it would be that way.
I just want, what you said earlier just prompted something. You know, like waiting for someone to get comfortable and stuff. What I find easiest in terms of making someone comfortable is when you start talking to them, to immediately go into the nuts and bolts of their chart. So I'm going to confirm your details. Mm-hmm. I see that your rising is a Taurus, and you start talking, and it's usually like once you start talking and you get the momentum going, the other person within 5 or 10 minutes, you can kind of see them decompress. But if we started the session by saying, this is who I am, this is how I feel, and you get to know them as a person, then it becomes personal about the two of you, and that causes more anxiety, I find.
Interesting.
So I try and keep it very factual. Because that puts people at ease. Because it's not me, it's your astrology chart, right? The more you take yourself out of it, the better, I find.
I get that. Like, I think that this is one of those things where we would convey that I think it might be good that there are two different types of astrologers in this regard. The metaphor I'm thinking of in my head is Sigmund Freud versus Carl Jung. Okay. People would come to Carl Jung and it was like he almost wanted to hold your hand during the reading. He's looking right at you and he's saying, well, like what's going on? How do you feel? And that sort of emotional mothering energy has its own place. But I think it's also very important to apply things more in this sort of Freudian vibe. If Sigmund Freud, he would have his patients lie on that, the couch that would you'd kind of be out like this. And then he's behind. He's this like fatherly voice that is not emotionally connected with you, which means that you can tell things to the client that are a little bit sometimes hard to hear. But if you're coming from a place of objectivity, detachment, and matter-of-factness about the issues that they might be having, some people might be relieved that they don't have to get too personal. They just want to give it to me straight, doc.
Yeah, different people want different takes. That's why astrology is so great, because you put your stamp on it, and someone who resonates with your energy will then ask you to read their chart. Like for me personally, I'm very like earthy and dry and matter of fact, right? I love having my chart read. I always go have my readings done, like my cards, my astrology. If someone starts waffling on about the existential angst that the color like red causes them, I roll my eyes. I can't take it.
Totally.
I want to know like what I'm supposed to do for work.
You're right. I came here for some. Totally.
Someone else who's like really artistic and creative and like the chakras, and I see auras and stuff. They want someone like that, because mine is going to seem much too
functional,
and they want a little bit of fluff and light and colors and stuff. Well, although it's not like I'm an astrology robot. I do tell anecdotes and I try and make it interesting and stuff. But I really try and focus on the practical application of your chart, how you can overcome obstacles and how you can maximize the natural talents.
Totally. And I find, this is part of my platform that I've been stating on this. And it's one of the reasons why I like to show the chart of the interviewers that I take on this show, is just kind of goes to show that there are different astrologers whose approach will work for different types of energies and people. And I, Gregory, I appreciate you helping me get that. Go ahead.
Did I say something else? That also applies to levels of experience, because someone who's sitting there doing a tarot reading with the book, looking up the meanings, certain people are going to be attracted to that. Like, I find the tarot a bit scary. I want someone who's inexperienced, who's looking it up and referencing it. And then people who've had readings for like 20 years, they don't want that. They want someone who like just smells a card and knows what it means.
Right, certainly.
So your level of experience really doesn't matter, because you're always going to attract a kind of audience who's at your level. So I'm just saying that to encourage people not to be put off if they don't have years and years of experience, because you'll get people who don't want that.
And
they want someone fresh and new, sometimes.
And how else do you get there is my other thought. How else do you get to a level where you have a lot of experience, except by wading through the shallows of not having that experience first.
Right.
Very wonderful, Greg. Now, Greg, you've given me a lot of time today. I appreciate you so much for hanging out with me.
Oh, you're welcome.
My audience, I feel like this is a really good session, and I deeply appreciate your time. So for all my audience watching, this has been Gregory Scott. Thanks so much for hanging out with us and talking with me with my friend Gregory. For anybody who wants to catch Gregory, you can catch him on his website at gregoryscott.com.
Well, go to YouTube first and type in Gregory Scott.
Yep.
And then go to my website and order a personal reading with me. But all my videos are on YouTube, the tarot, the astrology, the horoscopes, the eclipses, moons, everything.
Wonderful. Then they can get a taste of who you are and what you're all about, and then they can go from there. Now, if anybody, do you have an email that people would want to contact, or should we just tell people to go to your website and then go to the contact section?
Yeah, that's the easiest.
That would be the easiest. Okay. Wonderful, Gregory. This has been a wonderful session, and I really appreciate your time. So I'm gonna stop the recording, Gregory, and then maybe you and I will say goodbye to each other. And for everybody watching, thanks so much for hanging out with the two of us. And I hope you continue to watch me and to check out Gregory and all the great stuff that he's got happening. Cheers, folks.